All right, so I understand you all are in James chapter 4, and from what I heard, round about verse 11 is where you left off. But I was not here for all of the discussion, and I wasn't here for chapters 1 through 3. So how about we do a little review and catch up, and you all tell me what you picked up so far through the epistle of James. What has stood out to you from these last 4.5 chapters? That much. Yes, sir.
I think the talks about the tongue
Mm.
what a vital organ is, the dangers of it. Good lesson.
Very practical. Very practical. We'll see a little bit more about that in chapter 4 here. Absolutely. Anybody else? Yeah.
Faith without works concept is something you run into a lot with denominations that, making sure that's an established key part of what we do with our spiritual lives, and the fact that there's, almost a whole chapter dedicated to it that so many just kind of ignore.
Yeah, so the discussion in the second half of chapter 2 about what biblical faith looks like. That biblical faith is a belief that responds. You have to have both belief and response for it to be biblical faith. And the specific application in the second half of chapter 2 is caring for a brother or a sister that's in need. So he doesn't just leave it up here in the realm of ideas. He gives you very practical, show your faith by caring for one another. Yes?
Don't play partiality to anyone, and because the poor are just as good and equal as the rich.
Yeah, so they've been struggling within their church of brothers that are better off, not being fair with brothers who are not, and needing to be more unbiased. That's right. Yes?
Building your faith through trials.
Yeah. Yeah, that first chapter, right? One of my favorite verses over the last few years has been verse 4 of chapter 1. Let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. And someone was describing it to me in that phrase, let it have its full effect. Don't try to squirm out of trials before they're done working on you. Kind of like anything that you put in the oven, you want it to cook all the way through, not just the outside. But we get to choose whether we stay and let a trial have its full effect. So yeah, excellent. Yes?
I get out of respect.
Yeah.
Because it's not what you say, it's how you say it. It's not how you say it, it's what you say. It's what you do, it's not what you do, it's how you do it, when you do it.
Amen.
You're going to do something, do it with your heart, not with what it's called double-minded.
Yeah, and that idea is all through the letter. Don't be double-minded. Don't be over here and over here. Be single-minded. Very good. We're going to see more of that in the last half of chapter 4. What about chapter 4 itself? Let's kind of, yeah.
Well, the tongue is so very important. What proceeds out of the mouth. She means the oracles of God come out of the heart.
Yeah, so the tongue got brought up again. We're going to talk about that. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Right? What's inside of you is going to come out. And what comes out of you shows what's inside of you, whether you mean for it to or not. That's Matthew chapter 12, verse 34. So very good. What about chapter 4 more specifically? The first half of the chapter, what stood out to you?
Really, that we need to be all in, right? We can't be a friend of the world, right? You can't be one foot in, one foot out.
Yeah.
If you're not totally for God, then no matter how far away you are, you're against God.
Yeah. He talks about you adulterous people in verse 4. And I think what he's hinting at is what we do shows whether we're worshiping God or we're worshiping something else. So either God is first in our life or something else is first in our life. Yeah.
I think there's a false concept. People think they can sit on the fence.
Yeah.
You can't sit on the fence. You're either for or you're against. And if people just don't understand that.
Yeah, there's almost this idea that becoming a Christian or a disciple of Jesus is like a one-time deal. And it's a there's an initial event where you make a decision, but being a disciple of Jesus and a lover of God is a lifelong decision. You're making that decision multiple times a day, every day. Yes?
Along with that lukewarm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not accepted, sitting on the fence, lukewarm.
Yeah. One of the churches of Asia in Revelation 2 through 3, they were lukewarm and they needed to make a decision, right? Or else Jesus was going to reject them.
Yeah, God makes that very clear.
Yeah, that's right. So let's talk about that for a second. Let's review that idea of idolatry for a second. And then we'll finish out, Lord willing, the last half of 4 and maybe get into a little bit of 5. But I want to follow that idea of either I'm worshiping God or I'm worshiping an idol. That's the point that he's making. You're either idolatrous or you're faithful, is the point. So let's talk about this. Anybody know what kind of car that is? Mustang. What kind of Mustang? Oh, closer.
Cobra.
Yeah, more specifically a Shelby. Like we're getting there. That's a Shelby Cobra. I've got a buddy who lives up in northern Indiana, Union Carpenter, great buddy. That's his wife's car. His car is a black Cobra. They're empty nesters, so they can afford to do stuff like that now. He was getting ready to sell that car. That's in front of one of the houses that Ann and I had. He wanted to know if I wanted to buy it. And so I drove it around, beautiful car. I could not keep that car because I would have gotten so many tickets. Guess how much that car cost at the time? North of 60. It was north of 60. I think we had 3 kids at the time that they were selling that. Keenan, my oldest, was maybe 6, something like that. So Anna and I started having a conversation that lasted like 60 seconds. It wasn't gone in 60 seconds. About whether we buy that car or not. Now, we did not, but it really easily could have become an idol. You know, I want this car. Because you look at verses 1 through 3 of chapter 4, and what does he say causes fights?
Pleasure.
Okay? I've got these desires. I want something that somebody else has. I want that thing. I want that more than I want other things. And when I don't get it, I start to respond in ungodly ways. Right? So, murder shouldn't be down there yet. But he talks about our desires. Your passions are at war within you. You desire. Verse 2, you desire. There's something that you want. Are all desires ungodly? No. There are some that are morally neutral. There are some desires that are actually good. Right? You can desire money, health, clothes, shoes, relationships, a car, right? Respect, freedom. I studied through this with about 20 inmates in the Putnamville Correctional Facility in Indiana. I used to volunteer over there for about 4 years. And so we went down through this list, and the last 2 were really big for those guys. We want respect. You know, you do not want to get disrespected in prison. So they want respect, and of course they want freedom. Are any of those things sinful in and of themselves? No. Like you hopefully want some amount of money to pay your bills and maybe put groceries on the table. Okay? Relationships. Married couples in here, you want to be married to your spouse, I hope. Single people typically want to be in a relationship. Clothes and shoes, those might be higher on the priority list for some people. Rest. Oh, that's every parent in the room. I desire rest. Right? But what he talks about in verse 2 is you desire, and then what happens?
Then you lust.
Well, before you get to lust, you desire and you don't get it. Something gets in the way of you getting what you want. If it was the Cobra, if it was the Shelby, it was my wife. She got in the way of what I wanted. Because I said, hey, I would love to buy this car. And she said, we're trying to put a kid through college at some point. So college or the car, right? Now, I have a choice right there in that moment when my desire gets frustrated. What's my choice? I could accept it. I could walk away.
You can buy a car.
Or I could buy the car. Or I can go through a process to try to convince my wife to let me buy the car. Okay? So I can start to ramp up. What you see in verse 2 is you desire and do not have, so you murder. Like, it escalates quickly. I think there are some steps in between desire and murder. I would suggest there's this idea of I demand. So think back in Israel's history. What happened as the period of Judges wound to a close?
They demanded a king.
They demanded, use the word, they demanded, right? We need a king. And God said, you really shouldn't do that. And Samuel said, y'all really shouldn't do that. And they said, no, we want a king like the other nations to go out to war for us. And what does your language sound like when you start to demand?
Selfish.
Oh, for sure.
Threatening, in a sense.
Kinda. It escalates to that. We'll get to that. Does it start to sound like, hey, I deserve a car. I've only ever driven beaters all my life. You know, they've got 200, 300,000 miles on them. And I've only ever spent like $5,000 on a car or less ever. Like, it's my turn. I deserve a Mustang. Yes.
You're asking amiss.
That's right. You are asking amiss. And how are you using your tongue? See the theme in James? You're misusing your tongue? I should get it. Or I've earned it. I've earned it. All I want, you start to sound like a little kid. All I really want is this one thing and I'll be happy. You know? It's my right. It's my right as an American to own a Ford. But then you get to I judge. Anna says, Jeremy, you do deserve it. I wish we could get a nicer car for you. Maybe something not as expensive as a house. But she still gets in the way, and so I start to judge her. You can't ever let me be happy. You don't ever let me get my way. You're so selfish getting in the way of me being selfish. Yes? Yes, it sure does. It becomes all about you. You never, and you're judging the motives of the person. You're judging the motives, yeah.
It's like, we're your children, God, right? We're your chosen. Therefore, we deserve, we owe. Why don't you give us this?
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Yeah, but don't see, a lot of people don't understand. Women see things that men don't see. You talking about you wanted that car? That car would have been a bad example for you because that car could have broke up your home.
Oh, it could have. And what I would say is, in a family, you take turns having these moments. Because there's sometimes I see things that Anna doesn't. There are times that she sees things that I don't. And we're supposed to compliment each other. Because we take turns being weak. Right? So it still escalates, though, because in verse 2, you desire and do not have, so you, lower right, you start to murder. You start to punish. You get angry with them. You can withdraw from them. Well, I'm just not going to talk to you until I get my car. Okay? You start to gossip. You go to work. Can you believe my wife won't let me get that car? She is so selfish. She won't let me get that Shelby. Such a great opportunity. You're actually lying to yourself and others about it. Maybe you yell, ignore, pout. Do we have any biblical examples of spiritually immature adults pouting? You remember Ahab and Naboth's vineyard? He wanted that vineyard and couldn't get it, and what did he do? He sent his wife to go take care of it, but he went into his bedroom, threw himself on a bed, and had a hissy fit. King of Israel, crying in his pillow over a vineyard he couldn't get. Right? Because none of us ever do anything like that. Maybe we start to swear. That happens. Usually that's higher on the list. But it can escalate to murder. Ahab and Naboth. So let's take a second. How do you know if something in your life has gotten to this point of James 1 through 3? And I'd suggest a couple of questions that you can ask. Lamentations talks about asking yourself questions because we lie to ourselves, right? We need to ask ourselves some honest questions. In this scenario, what was I preoccupied with? The car. Okay? How would I complete this statement? If only blank, then I would be happy, fulfilled, and secure. If I bought the car, right? When a certain desire is not met, do I feel frustration, anxiety, resentment, bitterness, anger, or depression? Yeah, because I can't get the car. And just to share with you guys, like, that really didn't happen. It was a 60-second conversation, but there have been other things that we've argued about. Yes. Yeah.
On the other hand, if I was single, I would buy that car.
Right.
And then you would have all the little young girls coming at you.
Yeah. So, I'm the oldest of 7 kids. Okay, I have 5 brothers, 1 sister. My youngest brother is 13, but all the rest of us are pretty close in age. All right. And until Friday, 2 of my brothers were still single. They're creeping up on their 40s, and they were still single. One of them got married Friday. And at a family get-together a couple of years ago, we were talking about that. What it was like for them to be single and what it was like for them to date in their mid to late 30s. And one of them made a very honest conversation. He said, it's harder for me to date in my late 30s than it was in my 20s. And I said, why? And he said, because I'm set in my ways. You know, I'm so used to doing what I want to do. My schedule is around me. If I want something, I buy it. If I want to stay up late, I stay up late. And he said, the older that I get, it's just the more focused on myself I've been. And now, I think that's true of all of us as we get older. But for him as a single man, he's just used to living for him. And that was something he had to wrestle with. So I think that's very insightful. So if you go down through this list and answer these questions, you write down your idol on the line below. For me, it would have been the car. But it's not just about the car. Because Matthew 15:19 also talks about how out of the abundance the mouth speaks. What motive of the heart led me to make that thing an idol? It's not just about the thing. There's something going on inside of me. So let's talk about that. Matthew 15:18-19. What comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart. This is what defiles a person. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. And then Matthew 12, out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. The good person out of his good treasure brings forth good. The evil person out of his evil treasure brings forth evil. So there's something going on the left side first. What comes first? Yeah, there's something that's fueling the desire, though.
The responsibilities of that car. But you don't know if it was tore up.
Oh, well, that comes later. Yeah. Like there's extra baggage that comes with everything you want. It's not as easy as that.
Child going to college versus the car.
Yeah.
Like his education is more important than that car.
Yeah. So it'd be really easy to juggle one idol for another. Like I could make my son go into college an idol where I'm sacrificing, throwing everything at that one goal. So I can get them all out of balance really quick. Think about this. What are some of the issues of the heart? Pride. It's when pride fuels one of those desires that the idolatry takes over. Right? It's when pride fuels it. Or when selfishness fuels it. Or when fear fuels it. You know, I want people to respect me because I'm afraid of what will happen if they don't. And that's a real scenario in prison. Like, I'm so fearful of how they're going to treat me if they don't see me as worthy of respect. So I'm going to hurt somebody to make them respect me. But it's really fear that's driving the thing. Jealousy can drive it. Ambition. Like, we can keep throwing things up there. But you see how concerns of your heart like supercharge the desires and it just takes off? Okay. So all of that's in James 4. This is all come from James 4 because in verse 4, he lets us know, you adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? This is all about worship. Either you're worshiping God or you're worshiping something or someone other than God, and that's worldliness.
And then in verse 8, draw near to God, and he'll draw near to you. So
Yeah.
if we're not close to God, it's not God's fault, right? It's
Yeah.
ours.
Well, and it's actually the remedy. He's actually giving you the remedy. So what do? I need to repent. I need to repent of that and say, hey, I've been worshiping something or someone that's not God. I can't do that. Instead, I need to fear God. I need to love God. I need to trust God. I need to delight in God. I need to draw near to God again. Right? Yes.
And you need to have the opposite of what was the first thing? Pride. You
Yeah.
have to have humility to do these.
Yeah. And that's all through James. James is addressing arrogance. Right? Very good. Okay. And so this last half of the first paragraph you all were looking at, let's read. Could someone read 6 through 10 of James 4?
But he gives more grace, therefore he said, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Lament and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up.
Okay, all through those verses, you see this idea of humbling yourself, and you see this idea of developing a single-mindedness for God versus trying to worship two things. So especially in that phrase in verse 8, purify your hearts, you double-minded. What does he mean to purify your hearts? Does it mean have a clean heart?
Sights on things that are heavenly instead of worldly.
Yeah. So instead of having a heart that's diluted with a bunch of stuff, you're purifying it until it's focused on the one thing, which is God. And if you do that, you're no longer double-minded, which is something that he introduced back in chapter 1. And then humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. Okay. Well, I think we've reviewed everything you all have done. Yes.
If there's any one thing holding us back from total obedience to his will, then chapter 2, verse 10 would be a good point on that.
That's right. Very good. Okay. Well, let's see if we can wrap up the next couple of verses and move on to another development of the thought. Would someone read 11 and 12 of chapter 4, please?
Do not speak evil of one another, brethren. He who speaks evil of a brother and judges his brother speaks evil of the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver who is able to save and to destroy. Who are you to judge another?
Okay, you see that judging element from that table we had earlier? It's escalating, saying, don't get that far. Don't start judging other people. What reasons does he give for not judging others?
But for one, you're not the judge.
Okay, that's like, you are not judge.
There's one, and it's not you.
Okay, yeah, so you're not judge. Someone else is the judge. But what is my relationship to that person? He says it 3 times in verse 11. He's my brother. Okay, you're not the judge, you're the brother. So don't do the job that's not yours. You know, as the oldest of the 7, I had to hear that a lot. You're not the dad. You're not the dad, you're the brother. You know, and they're trying to knock you down. You're not the dad, you're the brother. That's what James is doing here. You are not God, so cut it out. Okay? And what was he using in his judgment in verse 11? The way he was speaking. There you've got that tongue again. Right? So he's really trying to humble this person, which is in keeping with the theme so far, the flow in these verses. Anything else that you all see there? I've got another point to make, but go ahead.
I was going to say, the point is made, he who speaks against the brother or judges his brother. But one is conversations that you're having with the brother where you're calling him out on something and judging him. Right?
Yeah.
And the other one is just mentally saying, which is just as bad.
Mm-hmm.
But on one side, it's you see something you'd like to at least discuss.
Yes.
You're not even discussing it. You're just making a call in your mind, and then because of that, you're reacting some way that you shouldn't have.
Or you say it when they're just not in the room. I can't believe so-and-so. Such a knucklehead. And go ahead.
I was going to say with verse 11 there, it also talks about that by doing this, you're judging the law. And if you're judging the law, therefore you're also judging the person that created that law. So in this particular case, that would be God. And that's certainly not something you want to do.
You don't want to be in that position, right? And let's make a distinction here. I think it's important. We got to be careful about it. Is he saying that we shouldn't lovingly confront someone?
No, and a lot of people call that judgment.
Okay.
I mean, I guess it could be, but in a loving, because you have to make a snap judgment. They're out drinking or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, you're judging. Oh, that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
But it's a loving judgment.
Yeah. So I can't remember what class I was in or what study I was in. Someone said it really well, and so I wrote it in the margin of my Bible. And this is just what I wrote: don't confuse confronting with being critical. There's a difference between loving confrontation and being critical, judging somebody. There's a difference between those two. And in this text, he's talking about being critical and negative and judging. Yeah.
I think when you confront somebody, it's very easy to be like, hey, you ran that stop sign. That's a confrontation. But to say, you ran that stop sign because you were doing that.
Yeah.
That's when you cross the line. When you start to assign
motives
why they do something, that's when you cross the line.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we lose that love. It's like, you know what, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you had good intention, but you were still wrong.
Yeah.
You're raising your kids. You're like, you know what? I know you want to go get the man, but you don't get to leave the store
right.
without me because that's wrong. And so you
right.
have to apply that as wrong as it is. For Black Friday, you treat everybody like you would treat your child. You know what?
Yeah.
You have good intentions.
Yep.
I'm going to believe you have good intentions.
Yep.
And here's where
that goes so far. That goes so far in Christians helping each other. Because to help each other and hold each other accountable, you have to address ungodly behavior. You have to address immaturity. But you need to address it in as loving a way as possible. Ephesians 4:15 and 25. Speak the truth and love. And what they're doing is going to motive. And he's saying, stop that. Now, motive, eventually you have to address motive, but that takes time. That takes a longer conversation. That takes asking a lot of questions. You've got to get to the fear and the ambition and the jealousy. But the way you get there is super important. There's a big difference between being critical and loving confrontation. And that was really helpful when someone said it that way. I want to make sure I haven't missed a hand. Okay. Let's read the next paragraph and kind of talk down through those verses. Someone wants to read 13 through 17, please.
Come now, you say today or tomorrow, we will go to such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit. Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow, or what is your life. Is it even a vapor that appears for a little time, and then vanishes away? Instead you might do what you say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. But now you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to him who knows to do good, and is not good, to him who sins.
Okay. This is still in the theme. I mean, it may seem like he shifts, but he's still addressing humility and arrogance. It's just in a different facet of life. So where is arrogance showing up in this person's life in these verses?
Thinking we have all the time in the world to do whatever it is we want.
Okay, thinking that we're in control of our future, right? What were some of the things they thought they could control? Look at verses 13 and 14. What did this person think he could do?
He could control his business and how much he made.
Yeah, so let's kind of take it in order. Look at his quote. Today or tomorrow, he thinks he's in control of his schedule.
He may not have tomorrow.
He may not have tomorrow, but he thinks he's got tomorrow. So today or tomorrow, I'm going to do this thing. Where's he going? I know for sure I'm going to take this trip. Right? How long does he think he's going to stay there? A year. So I'm going to leave today or tomorrow, and I know I'm going to make this trip, and I know I'm going to stay there for 365 days. To do that, what is he going to have to secure? A job, and
Make a profit.
okay, guess where I'm staying? Where did I stay last night? In a hotel. What does he have to secure for a year?
Housing.
He's going to secure housing for a year. He's confident that he's going to be able to do that. What is he confident about the result? Okay. Anybody in here been in business? They've got a 401k. Is that the way it works? Okay. No one controls the market. I mean, anyone who sells you a sure thing has probably got a bridge for you somewhere. Okay, but this guy thinks he's in control of all of that. Is that true?
He left God out of the equation.
Okay, he left God out. So touching on other themes from James, is it possible he might be a little self-deceived? Okay, he thinks that he's all that, but he's not. And following on verse 12, you've got this person that had to be reminded, you're not God. You're not the judge. You're not God. Guess what? You're not in control. You're not God. He's still on that same point.
You know, in the southern states where I'm from, you'll hear a lot of the old timers say, if it's God's will.
Yes.
The Lord's willing.
Yes.
You know, this is what I'm going to do. And I
Yes.
think that was a good thing to say because it always keeps God. If it's God's will, you know, we'll see you tomorrow. If
Yes.
it's God's will, we're going to go on this trip. You know, it just keeps
Yeah.
things in the forefront of the mind that needs to be there.
For sure. And it's easy. It'd be really easy to have a phrase like that become a ritual. Like you just say it, like you say, bless you, to somebody who sneezes. But we should still say it because it's a reminder. Is it good to make plans?
We have to.
You've got to. Proverbs is all about telling people to make plans. Okay? But as we make our plans, what do we make allowance for? God's going to derail them. Okay? God's going to throw a wrench in there. And when the wrench gets thrown, you can either pitch a fit that your plan didn't go the way you wanted it to, or you roll and adjust with what God has done to your plan. Because he's got a reason for doing that. Okay? Now, what I had here in the margin of my Bible again, verses 13 through 14, to make the point, James quotes a guy. And this is an illustration of out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. The way this guy spoke showed you the arrogance inside of his heart. He's quoting the guy. Okay? So the principle, he's actually using the principle. What does he say? What does he say in verse 14 to try to help this guy see himself?
You're just a regular life. At any time.
Yeah, first he says, look, your knowledge is like this. You don't know what's going to happen. And then he compares life to mist. Why mist?
Temporary, very temporary.
Maybe back to the Old Testament, it says yes, it's
Yeah.
not a chance.
Happened all
In Egypt. So this is kind of referring to that thinking.
Yeah. Same
It
principles.
is a miss.
It's quick. Our lives are so quick. So instead, what ought he do in verse 15? Acknowledge God. We're going to acknowledge God. Okay. Verse 16. What's the heart issue? Arrogance. It's coming out in his boasting. And that word is actually back in 3 and verse 5. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. He's tying back into that theme. The only thing, let's stay in James, the only thing that we should boast in is what in chapter 1 and verse 9? I'm really asking you for a paraphrase because it's a tricky sentence. Let the lowly brother boast in what God does for him. That's what I should boast in. I can boast in what God does for me, but I shouldn't boast in me. Right? So what does verse 17 have anything to do with the earlier verses? So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin.
I always thought that applied to the conscience.
That's true. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the sermon this morning from Romans 14, because everything needs to be done in faith. That's true. But it's connected because the beginning of the verse, I'm reading from the ESV, and it says so, which means it's connected. This is his concluding sentence. Some versions say then or therefore. So how is that connected to this arrogant guy? What's the good that this arrogant guy was forgetting? What's that? Close, so close. Who is he forgetting to acknowledge?
The Lord.
The Lord. The good thing that he was supposed to be doing was to acknowledge God in his planning. And he wasn't doing it, which means he was sinning in his plan. Does that make sense? Now, we can apply the principle, like our sister in the back did, to other areas, but I think in the context, the good that he forgot was to acknowledge God. And that meant even his planning was sinful, if we leave God out of it. Thoughts or questions? Disagreements, that's okay too. Yeah. Sure.
Nobody gonna tell me what I have to do.
Yeah, so being double-minded, and we've seen it in James so far. You've got a Christian that says, I want to serve God. I want to do what God wants me to do. I want to live for God. But you've also got what?
A worldly thing.
I want this. I want the Shelby Cobra. And so you're straddling the fence. Like, I want to be committed to God, but I still want to do the fun stuff and live for myself. And you're double-minded. Like, depending on the day or the week, you're bouncing back and forth. And he's saying, don't be that way. Stay over here. And for every Christian, we wrestle with that. Yeah.
Don't that go right back to that resist temptation? And
Yeah, resist
he or she, because did the devil transfer himself in the life?
Yes, he's deceptive.
Then there you go. Do wrong, do right.
Yes.
Do wrong, do right.
Yes.
Which one you gonna do? And
You gotta pick
I
one.
go over here, pick one.
Yep.
And then you wind up like that thing you put up there.
Yeah.
In that respect, you wouldn't be in jail, you wouldn't quit.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Well, so much of this is talking about a mentality, because like the picture we painted here in this chapter is, in the context, it's all negative. But when you look at, we just described probably people in here, people we run into every single day, and they're not bad, and they're not necessarily sinning, because it's like, as I was walking out, I heard talk about 401k.
Yeah.
We all hopefully are planning for retirement, and somebody has a nice car. There's nothing wrong with that. They worked hard for that, but it runs into the kind of the same premise where people want to say, "Oh, money's the root of all evil." No, it's not.
It's the
love of money is the root of all evil. And so, as you're going through here, like all of this stuff we're reading about by itself, there's nothing wrong with
No.
it. It's a lot of it's good. Like, I mean, we need to plan, we need to be prepared, but it's the where's your mentality with that? And for us as Christians, it's tough to look at somebody. Like, I can't look at you and say, oh, because you drive a Mustang, well, you're a terrible person because you've got, this fancy car and all that. Like, I can't judge that.
Right.
Now, if
you could be a good steward.
right,
You may have the right attitude about it.
and so it's all more of back to the original number one slide there.
Yeah.
My heart. Like,
Yeah.
where's your heart at? And that's not something where we can't, going back to the judgment, that's not something we can read. That's something that only
Yeah.
God can tell. Now, we can pick up on stuff by watching your actions and that type of thing, but it's this stuff in and of itself isn't a sin.
Right.
That's where we have to guard ourselves and make sure we don't cross that line of, hey, I'm planning for retirement, but the closer I get to retirement, now that's consuming. Like, this is my priority and focus.
Yeah. So all of us should see ourselves up. Every single one of us. At different times, at different stages, we're going to catch ourselves on that. And that's the point. That when you see yourself down here, you go, wait a minute, I'm getting angry over something I shouldn't get angry about. Why? Why am I judging and demanding? What is the desire that I want that I'm willing to get angry about it? And back yourself up. Because the point of this is your whole life is about your worship of God. We are created as worshiping beings. And every day of every week, you're worshiping someone or something. And the goal of the Christian, the goal of the believer in God is more and more of my life, I want to be a reflection of my worship to God. And so when I catch myself down here, I'm going to go, oh, wait a minute. I'm not worshiping God right now. What's going on inside of me? And my wife will catch it. I'll catch it in my wife. I'll catch it in my kids. And we'll keep trying to redirect back to, hey, we want to worship God. We want to worship God. And what James says in chapter 4 about that is the focus he's got on that is you need to humble yourself. To catch this, you need to humble yourself.
Verse 17 to me, and I would think to most people, is scary in that it's not what I did that was wrong. It's what I didn't do.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so if I do something that's wrong and I know and I repent of that, then to me that's catching myself doing something wrong versus not doing something I should have done and repenting of that.
Yeah.
Right? So when I didn't do the right thing or I didn't extend kindness or courtesy or love to somebody, I should have. I'm repenting of those kinds of things where those are sins in my life where I didn't do the right thing and that was sin.
Yeah.
The omission versus
commission. Yeah. And I think the practical, so what does the end of James chapter 4 look like in my week? And this is what it looks like, okay, as I try to do it right, is when I sit down and say, okay, what's on our calendar this week? You know, who's going to the orthodontist? What trip are we making? What classes do we need to get kids to? Who am I studying with? And we work out our schedule. Is that a good habit? Sit down week to week, month to month? Yeah. But I need to remember to do something really important as we work on our calendars, and that's what? I need to remember God is a part of this thing, and I may write something down in red pen, but in God's book it's pencil. And I need to acknowledge, Lord willing, tomorrow we're going to do this. But God may not be willing, and He may want to, and that's okay because He's God and I'm not. And it's going to take humility for me to acknowledge that. And so the specific application of 17 is, as we're making our plans, let's keep plugging God into it. And there's an evangelistic aspect to that. Because as I'm going about my week, and someone says, hey, I'll see you tomorrow, and I'm like, yeah, Lord willing, what am I doing? I'm not just acknowledging God in my schedule, I'm acknowledging God in their schedule as well. There's a God, and He's in control of what happens tomorrow. Okay. Like, I could stay up here for forever. What's our normal cutoff? 1:45? Hey, we're there. Okay, we got you all to chapter 5. Thank you so much for class, and I look forward to spending the day with you.
Come, brother. Hey, give me the bird. Two of them, you told me I got to see them when I'm all together. Man, yes. Makes sense. When I see them again, I realize I heard the Lord, but they look at the everything you told me that
I got one that's I'll bring both.
I get you.
And if I'm dipping on it,
Yeah. You're not kidding, man. That's up there. That's up.
I'll bring it all. I'll bring it.